The shovel struck earth with a hollow thud that made Jonas Pritchard's blood run cold, and as the moonlight caught the freshly turned soil of the grave before him, he knew with absolute certainty that something was terribly wrong. Jonas had been riding through the Arizona Territory for 3 weeks straight in the summer of 1876, delivering cattle from his ranch near Prescott to buyers in Tucson. The trail was long and dusty, and the August heat had been merciless. He had stopped at a small watering hole just off the main road to let his horse drink when he noticed the grave. It was not the grave itself that caught his attention initially, but rather the crude wooden cross that marked it, and the way the earth seemed disturbed, as though it had been filled in hastily. The cross bore no name, only a date carved roughly into the wood, and that date was today's date. Something about the whole scene felt wrong. Jonas was a practical man, 32 years old, with weathered hands and a face bronzed by years under the desert sun. He had learned to trust his instincts out here in the wild country, and those instincts were screaming at him now. A grave filled today, in the middle of nowhere, with no settlement nearby? It made no sense. He dismounted from his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Copper, and approached the grave slowly. The earth was still soft, and there were boot prints all around the site. 2 sets, maybe 3. Jonas knelt down and pressed his hand against the soil. It was warm from the sun, but underneath he could feel that it had not settled yet. His heart began to pound as a terrible suspicion formed in his mind. He had heard stories of people being buried alive, either by mistake or by design. Out here in the lawless territories, murder was not uncommon, and neither was the desire to hide bodies quickly. Without another thought, Jonas ran back to his horse and pulled the small folding shovel from his pack. It was not much, meant more for clearing campsites than digging graves, but it would have to do. He began to dig, working frantically as the sun started to sink toward the horizon. The soil came away easily at first, loose and uncompacted. He dug deeper, his muscles straining, sweat pouring down his face despite the cooling evening air. He had been digging for perhaps 20 minutes when his shovel struck something solid. Wood. A coffin. Jonas's hands were shaking now as he cleared away more dirt, revealing the rough pine boards beneath. The coffin was cheap, hastily constructed, and when he pressed his ear against it, he heard something that made his blood freeze. A sound, faint but unmistakable. Someone was moving inside, Jonas yelled out. His voice cracking with urgency, he attacked the coffin lid with the edge of his shovel, prying at the boards. The nails gave way with a screech of protesting metal, and the lid came loose. He threw it aside and looked down into the dark interior. A woman lay inside, her face pale as death, her dark hair tangled around her shoulders. Her eyes were closed, and for a moment Jonas thought he had been too late. Then her chest rose with a shallow, rattling breath, and her eyelids fluttered. Jonas did not hesitate. He reached down and lifted her from the coffin, shocked at how light she was, how fragile she felt in his arms. He carried her away from the grave and laid her gently on the ground, checking her pulse. It was there, weak but steady. Her skin was cold and clammy, and her lips had a bluish tinge. She had been drugged, he realized. Someone had drugged her and buried her alive. He grabbed his canteen and carefully dripped water onto her lips. She stirred, making a small sound of distress. Jonas spoke to her softly, trying to bring her back to consciousness. After what felt like an eternity, her eyes opened. They were a startling shade of green, wide with confusion and terror. She tried to speak, but only a hoarse whisper came out. Jonas shushed her gently and gave her more water. She drank greedily, coughing a little, and then her eyes focused on him properly for the first time. "Who are you?" she managed to say, her voice barely audible. "My name is Jonas Pritchard. I found you. You are safe now." Tears began to stream down her face, and she reached up with a trembling hand to touch his arm, as if to assure herself that he was real. Jonas felt something tighten in his chest at the sight of her fear and relief. "What happened to you?" he asked gently. "Who did this?" She closed her eyes, fresh tears spilling over. "My husband," she whispered. "My husband tried to kill me." Jonas felt a surge of anger so intense it surprised him. He helped her sit up slowly, supporting her back. She was wearing a simple cotton dress now filthy with dirt, and her hands were scraped and bloodied, as though she had tried to claw her way out of the coffin before the drug had fully taken hold. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Jonas said. "There is a town about 15 miles south. Can you ride?" She nodded, though she looked doubtful. Jonas helped her to her feet, and she swayed dangerously. He caught her, steadying her against him. She was tall for a woman, perhaps 5'7", and now that she was standing, he could see that she was probably close to his own age, maybe a few years younger. Despite her ordeal, there was a strength in her eyes that told him she was a survivor. "What is your name?" he asked. "Catherine," she said. "Catherine Webb." Jonas helped Catherine onto Copper, then swung up behind her. He kept one arm around her waist to steady her as they rode, and she leaned back against him, too exhausted to protest. As they traveled south through the darkening landscape, she told him her story in fits and starts, her voice growing stronger as the drug wore off. She had married Thomas Webb 2 years ago in Tombstone. He had seemed like a good man, a merchant with a successful dry goods store. But after the wedding, his true nature had emerged. He was controlling and cruel, and he had a violent temper. Catherine had endured it for as long as she could, but 6 months ago she had discovered something that changed everything. Thomas was involved with a gang of outlaws who were using his store to fence stolen goods. She had confronted him, and he had beaten her badly. After that, Catherine had started planning her escape. She had hidden away small amounts of money and had been preparing to leave when Thomas had discovered her plans. Last night he had given her tea laced with laudanum. She remembered feeling drowsy, remembered trying to fight it, and then nothing until she had woken in darkness, unable to breathe, trapped in a coffin underground. "He told people I died of fever," Catherine said, her voice shaking. "He had a doctor friend who signed a death certificate. No one questioned it. No one cared." "I care," Jonas said quietly, and he felt her body relax slightly against him. They reached the town of Silverado just after midnight. It was a small settlement, little more than a main street with a handful of businesses and a small church. Jonas took Catherine straight to the doctor's house and pounded on the door until a lamp flickered to life inside. Dr. Samuel Harrison was an older man with kind eyes and steady hands, and he asked no questions as he examined Catherine. He declared her remarkably well considering, and prescribed rest and nourishment. Jonas paid for a room at the town's only boarding house and left Catherine in the care of the proprietress, a sturdy woman named Mrs. Donnelly, who clucked over Catherine like a mother hen. Jonas himself took a room next door, but he did not sleep. He sat by the window, his rifle across his knees, watching the street below. The next morning, Jonas found Catherine sitting up in bed, looking much better. Mrs. Donnelly had brought her breakfast and had lent her a clean dress. Catherine's color had returned, and though she still looked tired, the terror had faded from her eyes. "Thank you," she said when Jonas entered the room. "You saved my life." Jonas pulled up a chair and sat down. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said. "Your husband thinks you are dead. That gives you an advantage, but if he finds out you are alive, he will come for you." Catherine nodded slowly. "I know. I cannot go back to Tombstone. I cannot go anywhere he might find me." Jonas had been thinking about this all night. "I have a ranch near Prescott," he said. "It is remote, and I could use help running it. You would be safe there, at least for a while, until we figure out what to do about your husband." Catherine looked at him with those remarkable green eyes. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You do not know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Jonas said simply, "and because no one should have to go through what you went through." Catherine reached out and took his hand. "Thank you, Jonas Pritchard. I will never forget what you have done for me." They left Silverado that afternoon, heading north toward Prescott. Jonas bought supplies and a gentle mare for Catherine to ride. As they traveled through the Arizona territory, Catherine began to open up more. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about how her parents had died of cholera when she was 16, about how she had come west seeking a new life. She had worked as a seamstress and a teacher before meeting Thomas. She had thought he was her chance at security and happiness, but she had been so very wrong. Jonas found himself drawn to her in a way he had not expected. She was intelligent and brave, with a dry sense of humor that emerged as she recovered from her ordeal. She asked him about his life, and he told her about his ranch, about the years he had spent building it up from nothing, about the loneliness of living out there alone. They reached the ranch 5 days after Jonas had pulled Catherine from that grave. It was a beautiful spread in a valley surrounded by red rock formations with a creek running through the property and good grazing land for cattle. The ranch house was simple but well built, made of adobe with a covered porch and a view of the mountains in the distance. Catherine stood looking at it for a long moment. "It is beautiful," she said softly. Over the following weeks, Catherine settled into life on the ranch. She proved to be a hard worker, taking over the cooking and helping Jonas with the endless chores that came with running a cattle operation. She learned to milk the cows, tend the vegetable garden, and even help with some of the lighter ranch work. Jonas found himself looking forward to their meals together, to their conversations in the evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He was falling in love with her, he realized. It had happened gradually, almost without him noticing, but now it was undeniable. The way she laughed at his jokes, the way she hummed while she worked, the way she looked at him sometimes with an expression he could not quite read, all of it had worked its way into his heart. But Jonas held back. Catherine was still legally married, and she had been through a terrible trauma. The last thing she needed was pressure from him. So he kept his feelings to himself and tried to be content with her friendship. Catherine, for her part, was grappling with her own complicated emotions. She was grateful to Jonas beyond words, but it was more than gratitude she felt. She found herself watching him as he worked, admiring the strength in his hands, the gentleness in his eyes. She had never known a man like him, someone who was both strong and kind, who treated her as an equal rather than a possession. But she was terrified of her feelings. She had trusted Thomas, and look where that had led her. How could she trust her own judgment again? And beyond that, she was still married. Even though Thomas had tried to murder her, even though she never wanted to see him again, the law still considered her his wife. 3 months after Catherine had come to the ranch, Jonas rode into Prescott for supplies. While he was in town, he heard news that made his blood run cold. Thomas Webb had been arrested in Tombstone on charges of murder. Apparently, he had tried the same trick with another woman, the widow of a prospector who had struck it rich. But this time, someone had witnessed the burial and had alerted the authorities. They had dug up the grave and found the woman barely alive, just as Jonas had found Catherine. Under interrogation, Thomas had confessed to trying to kill Catherine as well. He had admitted that he had wanted her money, the small inheritance she had received from an aunt back east. The authorities were now looking for Catherine, wanting her testimony to ensure Thomas was convicted. Jonas rode back to the ranch at breakneck speed and told Catherine everything. She went pale as she listened, but then a look of determination crossed her face. "I will testify," she said. "I will make sure he pays for what he did, not just to me, but to that other poor woman." It could be dangerous, Jonas warned, going back to Tombstone facing him. "I know," Catherine said, "but I have to do this. I have to take my life back." Jonas nodded slowly. "Then I am going with you," he said. "I will not let you face this alone." They traveled to Tombstone 2 weeks later, after Catherine had sent word to the authorities that she was alive and willing to testify. The trial was a sensation, with people packing the courthouse to hear the testimony. Catherine took the stand and told her story with quiet dignity, describing how Thomas had drugged her and buried her alive. The jury took less than an hour to find Thomas Webb guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. After the trial, Catherine met with a lawyer to discuss her options. The lawyer explained that given the circumstances, she could obtain a divorce easily, especially with Thomas's conviction. The process would take a few months, but it was merely a formality at this point. Catherine and Jonas stayed in Tombstone just long enough to start the legal proceedings, then returned to the ranch. As they rode back through the desert, Catherine felt as though a great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was free, truly free, for the first time in years. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars come out, Catherine turned to Jonas. "I need to tell you something," she said. Jonas looked at her, his heart suddenly pounding. "What is it?" "I have been thinking a lot these past months," Catherine said, "about my life, about what I want, and I have realized something important." She took a deep breath. "I love you, Jonas. I think I have loved you since that night you pulled me from the grave. You gave me back my life, but more than that, you showed me what a good man looks like. You have been patient and kind, and you have never asked for anything in return. I do not know if you feel the same way, but I needed you to know how I feel." Jonas felt as though his chest might burst. "Catherine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have loved you for months now. I did not say anything because I did not want to pressure you, did not want you to feel obligated. But if you mean what you are saying, then you have made me the happiest man in the territory." "I mean every word," Catherine said. And then Jonas was pulling her into his arms, kissing her with all the pent-up longing he had been holding back. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her hands tangling in his hair, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "Marry me," Jonas said. "As soon as the divorce is final, marry me. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." "Yes," Catherine whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The divorce was finalized 4 months later, in March of 1877. Jonas and Catherine were married 2 weeks after that in a small ceremony at the church in Prescott, with Dr. Harrison and Mrs. Donnelly standing as witnesses. Catherine wore a simple white dress that she had sewn herself, and Jonas wore his best suit. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives, Jonas thought about that night he had seen the grave by the side of the road. If he had ridden past, if he had ignored his instincts, Catherine would be dead. Instead, she was here, alive and beautiful, becoming his wife. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Catherine proved to be a natural rancher with a good eye for cattle and a head for business. Together, she and Jonas expanded the operation, buying more land and increasing their herd. The ranch prospered, and so did their love. A year after their marriage, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. Jonas was overjoyed, though also terrified. They were miles from the nearest doctor, and childbirth was dangerous even under the best circumstances, but Catherine was calm and confident. Mrs. Donnelly came to stay with them as Catherine's time drew near, and in January of 1878, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Samuel after Dr. Harrison. Jonas held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered, looking at Catherine with such love that she felt her own eyes fill with tears. "You are perfect." Over the next several years, their family grew. Catherine gave birth to 2 more children, a daughter they named Hope in 1880 and another son they named Daniel in 1882. The ranch continued to thrive, and Jonas and Catherine became respected members of the community. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, with enough bedrooms for all the children and a big kitchen where Catherine loved to cook. Samuel grew up to be a serious, thoughtful boy who loved working with the cattle. Hope was spirited and adventurous, always getting into mischief, and Daniel was gentle and kind, with a gift for gentling wild horses. Jonas and Catherine raised them with love and discipline, teaching them the value of hard work and the importance of treating others with respect. As the years passed, Jonas sometimes thought about that August evening in 1876 when he had seen a suspicious grave and had decided to investigate. It had been the single most important decision of his life. He had found Catherine, and in saving her, he had saved himself from a life of loneliness. Catherine, too, often reflected on how close she had come to death and how Jonas had given her a second chance at life. She had thought her life was over when Thomas had buried her, but instead it had just been beginning. She had found true love, a real home, and a family of her own. Every morning when she woke up beside Jonas, she felt grateful for the gift she had been given. In 1885, when Samuel was 7, Hope was 5, and Daniel was 3, the family took a trip to Prescott for the 4th of July celebration. It was a hot day, and the town was packed with people. There were games and races, a parade, and a big picnic in the town square. The children were thrilled, running around with the other kids, and Jonas and Catherine enjoyed watching them play. As they sat together on a blanket, Catherine leaned her head on Jonas's shoulder. "I have been thinking," she said. "About what?" Jonas asked, putting his arm around her. "About how lucky we are," Catherine said. "About how everything that happened, as terrible as it was, led us to this moment, to this life." Jonas kissed the top of her head. "I think about that all the time," he said. "I thank God every day that I found you." "I thank God every day that you stopped," Catherine said, "that you did not just ride past that grave." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children play. Samuel was teaching Hope how to throw a rope, while Daniel chased butterflies nearby. It was a perfect moment, the kind that Catherine wanted to hold on to forever. As the sun began to set and the fireworks started, the family gathered together on their blanket. Jonas sat with his back against a tree, and Catherine sat between his legs, leaning back against his chest. The children piled around them, exclaiming over each burst of color in the sky. Jonas wrapped his arms around Catherine, and she laced her fingers through his. "This is everything," Catherine whispered, so quietly that only Jonas could hear. "This is everything," Jonas agreed, and he held his family close as the sky lit up with explosions of red, white, and blue. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and joys. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when the cattle prices were low and money was tight. But Jonas and Catherine faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing season. In 1890, when Samuel was 12, he helped his father drive a herd of cattle to market in Phoenix, a journey that took 2 weeks. It was a rite of passage, and Jonas was proud of how capable and responsible his son had become. Hope, now 10, had taken over much of the care of the horses and had a special talent for training them. Daniel, at 8, was the family peacemaker, always ready with a joke or a kind word when tensions ran high. Catherine had become known throughout the territory for her kindness and generosity. She often took in travelers who needed a place to stay, and she never turned away anyone who was hungry. She remembered too well what it was like to be desperate and alone, and she was determined to help others whenever she could. Jonas, for his part, had become a leader in the community. He served on the town council and was known as a fair and honest man. People came to him for advice and help, and he never refused. He and Catherine had built a life that was rich in love and purpose, and they were grateful for every day they had together. One evening in 1895, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained throughout their marriage, Catherine turned to Jonas with a smile. "Do you remember the first time we sat here together?" she asked. "Of course," Jonas said. "You had been here only a few days. I remember thinking how beautiful you were, and how lucky I was that you had come into my life." "I was so scared," Catherine admitted, "scared of my feelings for you, scared of trusting again, but you were so patient with me." "You were worth waiting for," Jonas said, taking her hand. "You were worth everything." Catherine squeezed his hand. "We have built a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Jonas agreed, "better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in silence for a while, watching as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. In the distance, they could hear their children laughing as they finished their evening chores. Samuel was 17 now, tall and strong, with his father's steady nature. Hope was 15, beautiful and spirited, with her mother's green eyes. Daniel was 13, kind and thoughtful, beloved by everyone who knew him. I think it is time we told them the whole story, Catherine said suddenly, about how we met, about what Thomas did. Jonas looked at her in surprise. Are you sure? Catherine nodded. They are old enough now. And I want them to understand how precious life is, how quickly it can be taken away. I want them to know that even in the darkest moments, there can be hope. That evening, after dinner, Jonas and Catherine gathered their children around the fireplace. The kids sensed that something important was happening and sat quietly waiting. Catherine took a deep breath and began to tell them the story. She told them about Thomas, about the abuse she had endured, about the night he had drugged her and buried her alive. She told them about waking up in the coffin, about the terror and the certainty that she was going to die. And then she told them about Jonas, about how he had seen the grave and known something was wrong, about how he had dug her up and saved her life. The children listened in shocked silence. When Catherine finished, Hope was crying, and even Samuel looked shaken. Daniel got up and hugged his mother tightly. I am so glad Papa found you, he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. So am I, sweetheart, Catherine said, holding him close. So am I. Samuel looked at his father with new respect. You saved her, he said. You saved our mother. I did what anyone would have done, Jonas said, though his voice was thick with emotion. No, Hope said fiercely, not anyone would have stopped. Not anyone would have cared. You are a hero, Papa. Jonas shook his head, but Catherine reached over and took his hand. She is right, she said. You are my hero. You always have been. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Jonas and Catherine stood on the porch looking up at the stars. Jonas put his arm around Catherine and she leaned into him. I love you, she said. I will love you until the day I die, and beyond. I love you too, Jonas said. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. They stood there for a long time. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together out of tragedy and hope. The desert night was cool and quiet, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled at the moon. The years continued to unfold, bringing new adventures and challenges. Samuel married a girl from Prescott in 1898 and brought her to live on the ranch. She was a sweet, hard-working young woman named Elizabeth, and Catherine welcomed her with open arms. Hope married a young lawyer in 1900 and moved to Phoenix, though she visited often. Daniel stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and brother, and in 1902 he married a teacher named Margaret. As Jonas and Catherine grew older, they watched with pride as their children built lives of their own. They became grandparents, delighting in the arrival of each new grandchild. Samuel and Elizabeth had 3 children, Hope and her husband had 2, and Daniel and Margaret had 4. The ranch continued to prosper, and Jonas gradually turned over more of the day-to-day operations to Samuel and Daniel. He and Catherine spent their time enjoying each other's company, taking long rides through the countryside and playing with their grandchildren. In 1910, on their 33rd wedding anniversary, Jonas took Catherine back to the place where he had found her all those years ago. The grave was long gone, reclaimed by the desert, but Jonas knew exactly where it had been. They stood there together, hand in hand, looking at the spot that had changed both of their lives. Sometimes I still have nightmares about it, Catherine admitted, about being trapped in the dark, unable to breathe. Jonas pulled her close. I am sorry you had to go through that, he said. I wish I could have spared you that pain. But you did spare me, Catherine said, looking up at him. You saved me, Jonas. You gave me a life I never dreamed possible. You gave me love and children and a home. You gave me everything. You gave me everything too, Jonas said. I was just surviving before I met you. You taught me how to truly live. They stood there for a long time, holding each other. 2 people who had found love in the most unlikely of circumstances. As they finally turned to leave, Catherine took one last look at the spot where her coffin had been buried. Goodbye, she whispered to the ghosts of her past. Thank you for letting me live." They rode back to the ranch together, side by side as they had been for over 3 decades. As the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Catherine thought about all the years that had passed since that terrible night in 1876. She had been given a second chance at life, and she had made the most of it. She had loved and been loved, had raised children and watched them grow, had built a legacy that would continue long after she was gone. And through it all, Jonas had been by her side, her rescuer, her partner, her truest love. Jonas and Catherine lived out their days on the ranch they loved, surrounded by family and friends. They grew old together, their hair turning silver, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. Every evening, weather permitting, they sat on the porch and watched the sunset, holding hands and reminiscing about the years they had shared. In the spring of 1920, Catherine fell ill with pneumonia. Despite the best efforts of the doctors, her condition worsened. Jonas never left her side, holding her hand and talking to her even when she was too weak to respond. Their children and grandchildren gathered around saying their goodbyes. On a warm May evening, as the sun was setting and painting the sky in brilliant colors, Catherine opened her eyes one last time. Jonas was beside her, his face lined with age but still strong, still the man who had saved her all those years ago. "I love you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I love you too," Jonas said, tears streaming down his face. "I will love you forever." Catherine smiled, and then she closed her eyes and was gone. Jonas grieved deeply for his wife, but he took comfort in knowing that they had been blessed with 43 years of marriage and a lifetime of love. He continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by family, and he spent his remaining years telling stories about Catherine to anyone who would listen. He wanted everyone to know how brave she had been, how kind, how wonderful. Jonas Pritchard died peacefully in his sleep in 1923 at the age of 79. His last words were of Catherine, calling her name as though she were waiting for him just beyond the veil. The family buried him next to Catherine on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under 2 matching headstones that bore their names and a simple inscription that Samuel had chosen. Jonas and Catherine Pritchard. 2 souls who found each other in the darkness and built a life in the light, forever together. The ranch continued on through the generations, passed down from parent to child, a testament to the love and determination of the couple who had built it. The story of how Jonas had found Catherine buried alive became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most unexpected ways, and that one moment of bravery and compassion can change everything. Years later, when Samuel was an old man himself, he would take his grandchildren to the spot where his father had dug up his mother's grave. He would tell them the whole story, about the suspicious grave and the dying woman, about the trial and the marriage, about the love that had sustained his parents through all the years of their lives together. And always at the end of the story, he would say the same thing: "Remember this. Your grandfather could have ridden past that grave. He could have decided it was not his business, that he did not want to get involved, but he stopped. He dug. He saved a life. And in doing so, he found the love of his life and gave all of us the gift of being part of this family. Never underestimate the power of one good deed, one moment of courage. It can change everything." The children would nod solemnly, understanding the importance of the lesson. And as they grew up and had children of their own, they would pass the story down, ensuring that Jonas and Catherine's love story would never be forgotten. In the end, that was their true legacy. Not the ranch, not the money, not even the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who came after them. Their legacy was the story itself, a tale of darkness and light, of death and rebirth, of a love so powerful that it had endured through decades and would continue to endure through generations to come. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments there is always hope. And sometimes that hope comes in the form of a lone cowboy riding past a suspicious grave, a man with the courage to dig into the darkness and pull someone back into the light.